much, and I begin by acknowledging we're meeting tonight on the land of the Aboriginal people, the Ayora people of the Gadigal Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also pay my respects to the 2,200 Syrian people who have died, who've laid down their lives, who have given their lives in the cause of democracy, in the cause of freedom, in the cause of human rights. On your behalf, I pay my respects to those people in Syria who struggle today under the most appalling conditions in order to be free. Not just free for themselves, but free for all of us. Their struggle is our struggle. We stand with them. I acknowledge tonight the presence of my colleague David Shoebridge and also my colleagues David Clark and Linda Volz from the New South Wales Upper House. We deliberately designed tonight so as it was not party political, so as that all the major parties were represented here tonight, because the respect of human rights, we have our disagreements, but the respect of human rights goes way beyond the party political battles that happen here in Australia. The courage of the Syrian people, the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands of Syrian people who have turned out on the streets around Syria, who have said very loudly and very clearly they will not tolerate the systematic abuse of their rights, they will not tolerate the systematic abuse of democracy, they will no longer tolerate a dictatorship that runs Syria for its own purposes and ignores the needs of the community. That demands much more than just a simple political response. It demands a global response. It demands a response from every person in Australia who values freedom, who values human rights. The toll of what's happened to the people in Syria is unspeakable, yet we have to speak it. The shocking deprivation of human rights, arbitrary arrest and torture, rape, holding individuals hostage against the surrender of members of their families, the continued attacks on villages and towns that dare to stand up to the Assad regime, the ongoing beatings, tortures, holding of political prisoners, the toll goes on and on. It should not surprise us that the Assad regime engages in these activities. We've known for decades that the Assad regime has no respect for democracy and no respect for its own population. But what is more shocking, and what remains totally shocking, is that it's still going on in 2011. It's still going on. The world continues to tolerate it, and that must come to an end. Human rights are not negotiable. They're not something that can be had at some stage or another stage. They are a universal, fundamental right of every human being. The right to democracy, the right to participate in the election of a government, the right to express oneself when one is in opposition to that government, the right to be able to do so without the fear of arbitrary reprisal against yourself or your family members or your community. The right to live a life with reasonable comfort, the right to live a life where you can say what you believe and not suffer reprisals. These are fundamental. They exist because we are humans. They exist because we are humans who care about each other. But they are rights that are systematically denied within Syria. And they are rights which we must stand up for, we must make a stand. The response from the United Nations has been too slow and too weak and has not gone the distance. It is time to make sure that the United Nations and that all countries around the world stand up to Assad. The Assad family is a family of bullies, always has been and always will be. It needs to be understood that the continued economic engagement with Syria is economic engagement with a fascist dictatorship. It's economic engagement with a regime that has thoroughly and profoundly lost its legitimacy. When a regime behaves towards its population in the way that the Assad regime has behaved, when a regime resorts to turning its own military on its population, that regime is no longer legitimate. That regime no longer deserves the respect of the rest of the world. It no longer deserves investment in its oil resources. It no longer deserves any form of economic engagement. It is time that sanctions were put on Syria, and those sanctions remained, and those sanctions were tough, and those sanctions brought down the Assad regime. It is time for the rest of the world to stop allowing Russia to protect its friends in Syria. It's time for the rest of the world to stop allowing those corporations that continue to make profit out of Syria to distort the political process. As human beings, we stand up for and we support human rights. We should not allow our political process to deny those human rights to the people of Syria. There are real opportunities now for change. The 2,200 people who have died in Syria, the tens of thousands who are held in jails arbitrarily, the tens of thousands who have suffered torture, those individuals who have seen their families killed and beaten before them, those people must not be allowed to suffer in vain. There are real opportunities for Australia to join with the United States and European Union to demand that Bashar al-Assad steps down from the presidency and recognises that the time is up for his regime. It is time to cease recognising the Assad regime's legitimacy. It is time to urge the United Nations to take immediate action. Your presence here tonight is part of raising the consciousness of the Australian people. We see these things on television and we move on with our ordinary lives. We ignore the plight of the Syrian people. That must come to an end. 2 months ago, the New South Wales Upper House, all parties supported a motion calling for the Assad regime to allow access to its detention camps for United Nations observers and to provide protection for refugees from Syria. We cannot forget not just those who are still in Syria, but those who have fled to Turkey and to neighbouring countries, who are living a very precarious existence. This evening, and from here on, we all join together in saying that this must come to an end. Human rights in Syria have to be respected. The Assad regime must go, and it is time for democracy in Syria. I thank you all for being here tonight. I thank you for standing up. I thank the Syrian people for being a beacon of intolerance of abuse and intolerance of dictatorship. I pledge to you my support and the support of my colleagues to stand with you in the battle for a democratic, human rights respecting, freedom loving Syria. Thank you very much.
Dr. John Kaye من حزب الخضر.